solar intelligence. Today discussing the next how-to video in the series, how to select your inverter. Selecting an inverter can often be an emotional discussion. We try to separate emotion and brand loyalty from facts. We base our decisions on facts. We make a clear specification of what we need, what our needs are, what the requirement is, and make a selection on that. Obviously, your budget plays a big part. So those are the drivers that we use to choose the inverter. Now, there's so much to be said about selecting your inverter. So I don't want this video to be an hour-long video. I'm trying to leave it to keep it less than 20 minutes. So I'm not going to say it again, but it's very important. There are two previous videos that we've recorded. The one is size your system and the other one is to budget your system. Those videos play a big part in the information that we're using in this video. So please go look at our YouTube channel and you'll see those videos on our list. Right. So let's first talk about what system we are targeting. We are targeting a hybrid system. So we're assuming that most households, and by the way, it's a residential application. We're talking about the residential solution. Most households have definite use for a backup system for obvious reasons, but also electricity is getting expensive, energy is expensive. So it needs to be a hybrid system that also has solar panels that you can save a bit of money. Let's get the regulatory requirements out the way first before we get stuck on that. We mentioned in the previous video that for us it's an imperative that your inverter needs to be compliant with the regulation. There's a regulation called the NRS. The NRS is 097. There are two parts of it, the -2 and the -1. 097-2 and -1 both are focusing on grid interconnection. -2-1 is the utility interface, and -2-3, that's the simplified connection criteria. That is not law, that is not regulation, that is not written into the law yet. But most municipalities refer to the NRS. When you make an application to your municipality or even the estates where you live, most of the estates that I've worked with, they've got their own regulation or their own standards as well. And most of them refer to the NRS. So they then incorporate the NRS and make that the reference for your system to be a compliant system. So although the NRS itself is not written into law, it is drawn into law by most municipalities and most estates. So who makes the rules? Who says what you're allowed to install and what not? Whomever you buy your electricity from or your power from, that is the person that makes the rules. So if you look at the stamp on your electricity bill, if that is from Ekurhuleni or from Eskom or from whomever, maybe the estate you're buying from your estate, they will make the rules and they will guide you on what you may and may not install. And then let's talk about the list of approved inverters. I think it's twice a year a list of approved inverters is published. It comes mostly from Cape Town because they're a bit more progressive and they're more actively supporting the industry to install inverters. There's a list of approved inverters. And your inverter has to be on that list of approved inverters. Yes, it's a debate and you'll hear many people saying that's not the case, but I've got an off-grid inverter. That is not the case. Your inverter needs to be on that list of approved inverters. Yes, some people sell and market their inverters as off-grid inverters. The definition of off-grid is the inverter does not take a reference from the grid and it does not synchronize, or it does synchronize with the grid. So as soon as your inverter takes a reference from the grid and it synchronizes with the grid, then it is a grid-connected device. If you say it's off-grid, it does not need to be certified, it does not need approval. The only approval, and if you read the NRS, that is very clear, the only system that does not need approval is a system that does not take a reference from the grid at all. In other words, it has no connection to the utility grid, to your network service provider. So your inverter must be on the list of approved inverters. I'll include a link to the list of approved inverters below this video. So you're welcome to click that link and follow then to see the list of approved inverters. Right, so let's go talk about the minimum inverter standard. So obviously before we start talking about brands and sizing and all that, let's just see what do we need from this inverter so that at least we have something that will be future-proof. As I mentioned, regulatory compliance, that's a fact. We mentioned the previous videos, it must be bi-directional. So if you don't know what that means, please follow or go back to the previous videos and you'll pick it up there. It must have dynamic feed-in control, also very important. If you want your inverter to really render decent savings, it must have a feed-in, must be able to feed in and have feed-in control. Most municipalities and also most estates don't allow yet, or many do currently, but most still does not allow feed into to the network. So you must have some other way to control that feed in up to a certain point. So typically the inverter will have a current transformer or a CT. That current transformer will then act as a non-return valve, if you were. to control that the inverter doesn't feed power in beyond that point. Or other inverters have two outputs. It has a non-essential and essential output. Your inverter needs to have at least those two so that you can control and maximize the savings in your system. All that's information coming from previous videos. Then bringing something new to the discussion, and that is your inverter must have a monitoring platform. I'm of the view that a solar installation is incomplete if it does not have monitoring. What does monitoring mean? Monitoring is basically the inverter must have a connection to the internet. Typically it will connect to the Wi-Fi, or some inverters you can actually hardwire by actually connecting network wiring to it. That inverter then sends the performance information to the manufacturer's website. So the manufacturer's website will then take or receive all the data, put it into a database, and you can log into your manufacturer's website and see the performance of your system. That is really, really important. If your system starts misbehaving and the battery doesn't get through the night, you planned the battery to give you 4 hours of backup, but you only get 2 hours of backup. Why is that happening? If you have a monitoring platform, you can log into the monitoring platform and you can see what was the load during that period, what was the battery state of charge during that period. So that information is really, really important. So in our view, a solar system without a monitoring platform is incomplete. And then what about the BMS communication? BMS is a battery management system. The BMS is a little computer inside the battery that communicates with the inverter. The BMS manages the cells inside the battery to make sure that the cells are safely charged and discharged. When something is not happening the way it should be happening, the BMS communicates that to the inverter. And if you are logging into your inverter's monitoring platform, you will be able to see the reports that come from the battery. So for preventative maintenance, you'll see if the battery is being misused or abused by the inverter. You'll see that information, and you can then make adjustments on the programming of the inverter. So we also make that as a minimum requirement that your inverter must have communication with the battery, and it must be adaptive charging and adaptive management from the battery. So the battery will say what voltage it needs, how many amps it can handle, either charging or discharging, and that information must control the inverter. So the inverter does not control the battery, but the battery controls the inverter. That is the communication benefit that you win by setting up your inverter and battery to communicate. And then MPPTs, maximum power point tracker. The inverter has a function to manage the solar panels. That is called MPPT, maximum power point tracker. Now the MPPT optimizes the output from the solar panels. Without an MPPT, the panels will not be running optimum and you'll be losing energy. So you cannot run your system without an MPPT. Most budget entry-level inverters has only one MPPT. Now here's the catch with the MPPT. All the panels connected to an MPPT, whether it's 1 or 50, they have to have the same orientation, the same slope, the same size panel, have to be identical, because the MPPT manages all those panels as if it is one panel. So if you have only one MPPT, all the panels has to be on one face of your roof. So if your house has two different sections that you want to use, one may be facing east and the other one facing west, you must have two MPPTs, one to manage the eastern panels and one to manage the western panels. So maybe look at your house when you make a decision of which inverter to buy. Are you going to use only one roof surface? If you use only one roof surface, well, then one MPPT can do the job. But if you've got more than one surface, then how many ever surfaces that you need to put panels on, that's how many MPPTs you will be needing. So keep that in the back of your mind. And then the last discussion we have to have is just about transformerless versus transformer-based inverters. Transformerless inverters, people also call that high-frequency inverters. That's an inverter that actually converts the DC to AC using silicon transformers, IGBTs, which is basically an electronic device to convert the DC to AC. If you have a transformer-based inverter, then transformer-based inverter can handle much higher inductive loads than what the high-frequency does. Now that sounds all complicated. If your house is a typical household with normal household appliances, then a high-frequency inverter can work for you, the so-called transformerless inverters. But if you have high inductive loads, big motors, big transformers, maybe some welding, any inductive loads, as I mentioned, like air conditioners, big motors starting and stopping, maybe big cooler room, things like that, then be very careful to use the transformerless inverters. They do not have the capacity to handle inductive loads. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you have questions on it, don't hesitate, drop some comments in the bottom of our videos, and we'll see if we can reply and maybe give you some more information. Great, so we have an understanding of what we need from our inverter. Then the next question we have to answer is, are we going to install a hybrid inverter, or are we going to construct a hybrid system? Remember that both hybrid inverters and constructed hybrid systems offer exactly the same functionality. But with a hybrid inverter, everything is in one box. You've got one box that does the panel management and the battery management. While with a constructed hybrid system, you've got one part of your solution managing the solar panels, and the other part of the solution managing the battery. There are pros and cons. Obviously, it's cheaper and easier to install hybrid inverters. The constructed hybrid systems are a bit more complicated to install and a bit more complicated to design, but it gives you more flexibility. So if you need more AC power and less solar panels that you want to connect, well, you can have multiple battery inverter chargers, but just one smaller either charger or a PV inverter to connect for the solar panel management, or the other way around too, that if you don't need so much solar panel power, or rather inverter power, but you need more solar panel power, well, you can have more panels by just scaling that, either more panels or more batteries. So you've got more flexibility. And then from a functionality point of view as well, the constructed hybrid systems often offer more functionality, both from a management point of view, a remote management point of view, that you can remotely log into your system. So if you're on a holiday and you log into your system at home and you see things are not behaving that they should, you can log into the inverter and stop and start the inverter, reconfigure the inverter, maybe even update the software and change the settings of the inverter. And then also the advanced programming option. So with more of some of the more advanced inverters, you've got 3 or 4 relays that you can control. So with software, you can program that to open and close at a different state of charge, or different battery state, or a different load, which means that you can switch the geyser on and off depending on how much PV comes in. You can start and stop pumps depending on what the battery state of charge is. So you've got multiple little relays inside your inverter that you can then control with software to manage your house, to optimize the use of your energy. So that's just some guidelines as to choose whether to construct your hybrid system or to use a hybrid inverter. And maybe the last point I can use or mention on that is, I call it single point of failure. So if you have an hybrid inverter and something goes wrong with the inverter and you take it off to have it repaired or wait for replacement, you cannot use any part of your solution. The panels cannot be optimized because the inverter does that. The battery sits there and it cannot do anything. While if you had a constructed hybrid system, remember there are 2 different subcomponents. The one is to manage the panels. The other one is to manage the battery. So if you have to remove the part that manages the panels, while you still have a UPS, you can still have the battery inverter charger then use ESCOM to charge the batteries. But you've got no panels to do it. Or if the battery inverter charger fails, well then if you had an AC coupled system, you still have the solar panels, and the solar panels can then still be saving you money. So with a constructed hybrid system, you just have a little bit more flexibility, and you don't have that single point of failing everything. Right, now let's talk about the inverter power rating. What size must the inverter be? Everybody says bigger is better, yep, but budget is an issue. We saw previously that from 13 to 19,000 rand is the cost per kilowatt. So if you have a 3 kilowatt system, well, let's say you go for the mid-range system and it's 16,000 rand, 48,000 rand. So if you talk of a 3 kilowatt system, mid-range, it'll cost you roughly 48,000 rand. If you want to up that now to 8 kilowatt system, well, there's 8 times 16,000 rand, and that then becomes quite a bit more expensive. So if you have the budget and you want to spend the money, then go for an inverter big enough to supply your entire property. So let's say the main circuit breaker capacity in your distribution board is 63 amps. That is roughly 15 kilowatts. So if you install a 15 kilowatt inverter, well, then you can power the entire house with your inverter. But if let's say again, if it's 16 kilowatts or a 15 kilowatt inverter that you're installing, well, at 16,000 rand per kilowatt, let's do the math quickly. I mean, that will be 260,000 rand quite easily that the system will cost you. So that is beyond your current budget planning. Well, then one must make another plan. And then that's what we call the split the dB. Splitting the dB means that the non-essential and the essential circuits in your house, You need to separate that. So that means physical work in your distribution board to actually rewire and reconfigure things. Remember, you're not allowed to do that. If you're a qualified electrician, you may, but only a qualified electrician is allowed to make changes in the electricity and into your DB board. So if you split the DB, then you can decide what are your essential items and which are the non-essential items. And then you size your inverter to only power the non-essential items. That's a much more sensible solution, and also makes a lot more sense from a budget point of view. So if you say non-essentials, well, let's say non-essential, you list for your requirement, what are your essential items. Essential is lights, TV, fridge, your router and your gates and your security system, etc. So if you list all those items and you add the power rating of all those systems, that will tell you what is the power rating that you need for your inverter. So to talk about that, we now need to talk about power and energy. Now, this is not a lecture on power and energy. Maybe that'll be a video in the future. Safe to say that if you have an appliance in your house, it must have a little placard on it or a little label on it. It'll tell you what is the power rating of this device. Or have a look at the list. In the description below, you'll see we've got a link to a table of household appliances and the typical power rating of those items. As a rule of thumb, work on roughly 2 kilowatts per high consumption device. High consumption devices are typically items that heat up. A plate, a geyser, a microwave, a hairdryer. Those are all items that generate heat. We work on roughly 2 kilowatts for each of those items. It's not the whole truth. Yes, they are smaller, yes, they are bigger, but as a ballpark number, work with roughly 2 kilowatts. So if you have a kettle and a microwave running at the same time, well, that's 4 kilowatts, or microwaves maybe a bit less, maybe 1.2 kilowatts. But if you work on the ballpark number of 2 kilowatts, that's 4 kilowatts. So if you want to run 2 high demand appliances at the same time, well, then a 3 kilowatt inverter cannot do it for you. But if you have the discipline in your house to say that we will not use more than one high demand device at a time on the essential bus, then a 3 kilowatt inverter can maybe do the job for you. You need to specify what is right for you. I cannot tell you what is right for you. You must decide what is necessary. And then again, if you work with the numbers, 13,000 Rand per kilowatt specific cost for a budget system, or 16,000 Rand per kilowatt for the mid-range, and I think it was 19 or 18,500, let's call it 19,000 Rand per kilowatt for the top-end system, well, then do the math. You know, if you want a 5 kilowatt system, well, 5 times 19, you do the math, and that's how much money you need to budget for your system. Right, needs and wants. Yep, separate your needs and wants. Yes, I want my stove on. Yes, I want my air conditioner on. Yes, I want the geyser on. Yes, I want, but those all add up and it becomes too expensive. So if you're budget conscious, decide how much money you have available, and then maybe size or decide on your essentials and non-essential based on your budget. Brand selection. Now, this is going to be a discussion. I bet you we're going to be touching on some tender nerves here. Again, I mentioned that we are brand agnostic. We don't have a loyalty to any brand. We look at functionality, we look at our requirements, we look at what the load is, and then from that we decide what the inverter is. So we're not going to get ourselves stuck on the slippery slope. We're working with facts only. There are too many brands to mention all the brands. So what we've done, we've listed on a graph below a table from the cheapest to the most expensive, which is basically the entry-level budget inverters to the top-end expensive inverters, rated from the left to the right, from the cheapest to the most expensive. You need to look at the pricing. Google, come to our website, have a look at the options, and you'll see what those inverters costs are. Hope you enjoyed this video. I try to make it as quick and as short as I can. If you get stuck, don't worry, drop us a comment and we'll reply to your comments. Remember the thumbs and the bells. If you want to know about the future videos, please subscribe to this channel and click the notifications. The next 2 videos in this series will be how to select my battery and how to select my solar panels. Looking forward to see you then. Bye now. We love the earth. It is our planet.